Howdy folks, Justin here, and Houses of Morrowind has been out for a couple weeks now. We've seen some of the impact, the early impact of the cards and the decks they've helped build. And what I wanted to do was break down into two videos my top 6 commons and rares in this first video, and in the next video my top 6 epics and legendaries. Why 6? Well, that's one for every House of Morrowind: Dagoth, Vani, Tribunal Temple, Hlaalu, Ridore, and of course House Sodius. So we're going to start with my top 6 commons, and coming in at number 6 is Ridore Battlespear. Ridore Battlespear is an interesting card. Let's go ahead and look at the premium versions. I get flack sometimes for not doing this. Very nice, huh? Ridore Battlespear is an interesting card. Items in this game are not particularly common in decks. So you see them from time to time. Ridore Battlespear has a lot of value for the cost that you invest into it. It curves nicely. It sort of allows you to play 1-drops, because then if with the ring, you can ring out a Ridore Battlespear and turn your creature into a real threat. But I like the fact that you're functionally getting +2, +4, assuming you swing with a creature the turn you play this. And for 3 Magicka, that's a pretty good rate. And the extra toughness really matters, because a creature with Rally is a creature you want to have stick around for a little while. Ridore Battlespear is not seeing a ton of play right now, but I think it's a strong enough card that it will, and I think it's a safe craft if you're looking to not buy any Houses of Morrowind packs and you just want to add something from Houses of Morrowind to a deck. Ridore Battlespear fits in aggressive and mid-range strategies, I think, pretty well. Next up, we have, coming in at 7 cost, and a card that I was sort of not keen on at first, we have Spirit Knife. Spirit Knife, beautiful animation as well. Spirit Knife for 7 Magicka deals 7 damage to a creature and draws a card. So when I was reviewing the set in its entirety, my question was, if Piercing Javelin cost 7 and drew you a card, would you run it? And I think the answer was yes. It turns out Spirit Knife is very close to that. It doesn't have Prophecy, but you don't need a combo with Thorana in order to make it good, even though you can. In certain metas, this is going to be an incredible card. It's a really solid removal spell. It's a common card, so you shouldn't feel too bad crafting some of these. Overall, Spirit Knife is a card that has overperformed in every capacity that I can possibly imagine overperforming in. You don't run it as the sole source of removal in your deck. You run it alongside smaller, cheaper removal spells. But Spirit Knife's ability to be a mirror breaker type card when you're facing against a deck that's moving at a similar pace to your own, because you're able to remove a threat and refill your hand at the same time, puts it on a really high power level for a common. I think Spirit Knife is a pretty great card, and it's worth pointing out, just like Ridore and Battlespear, great in Arena. Coming in at number 4, we have another item, actually. We have, let's go to 2s, Gavel of the Ordinator. Look, it's shiny. A Gavel of the Ordinator is your 2-cost removal spell in some situations, reach in some situations, ability to trade successfully in other situations. Like, it's just a really solid card. The ability to make the wielder immune to damage until end of turn is, it's ward, basically. Although, in some respects, it's better than ward, because it has the exact same upsides and also combos with ward creatures, allowing them to not, have their wards broken this turn. Double ward, if you will. A Gavel of the Ordinator is, an incredible tempo play. Obviously, nuts in Arena, and another card that isn't seeing a ton of play, but is on a really high power level. And I think once the meta settles a little bit, is the sort of card you look to when you're looking to build a new deck with a better understanding of what you're facing. I think Gavel the Ordinator is just an exceptional card. And another example of what I like about the items in Houses of Morrowind, in that they're pushed to a level where you consider putting them in your decks. Steel Scimitar's inclusion in the past has always just been a math thing. These have unique abilities and allow you to advance the board. They're not just aggressive tools that you're putting in because the math checks out. Gavel the Ordinator is my number 4 pick. Coming in at number 3. Number 3 through 1 are cards that we have seen on the ladder already. But as far as the Oathman go, this is the only one that makes the list, even though all of them are strong cards. Hlaalu Oathman deserves a special shout out because of how flexible this card is. For 3 magic you get a 2/2, but if you meet its trigger abilities, you get 3 extra magicka, so it's free, and you draw a card. You don't have to meet both of them either for this card to be pretty useful. Just having a green creature on board gives you a free body, and having a red creature on board gives you a card, and both of those are totally reasonable in a Hlaalu deck that's trying to exploit plot, trying to trigger Haunted Manor, and just trying to swarm your opponent before they're able to do anything about it. Hlaalu Oathman is a very, very reasonable inclusion in two color decks as well as 3-color decks, which is why it gets the nod over the other Oathman, because I think it's kind of unique in that. Both Archer and I think Crusader could find a home for this card. I think it's a pretty safe investment. Coming in at number 2 is a card that I've seen play in a couple different decks. Ooh, not the premium version. That is Lower Cant Smith. So he's hard at work here on the Forge, or whatever that thing is. For 3 magic, you get a 2/2 with plot. Equip a friendly creature with a 2/2 Steel Scimitar. Just like I was talking about Steel Scimitar earlier, this is a math thing. This is functionally a 4/4 for 3 that is better than a 4/4 for 3 because you get immediate board impact, ideally with the Steel Scimitar, although you can equip it to itself. You do have to trigger plot to do that, so it requires a little bit of deck building, finesse, a little bit of planning ahead. But Lower Cant Smith is a strong enough card that I'm sure it's going to see play for quite a while, and is a card that I've seen on the ladder already. And it's the kind of card that fits nicely into a couple different strategies. If you need to trigger your House Dagoth's 5-power matters stuff, well, this guy can help get a guy to 5 power. If you want to be a little bit more controlling and you're running Dagoth control or Redoran control, you can make successful trades with your guards this way. You can push lethal this way in an aggressive deck with the Hlaalu deck. It's really all over the place in terms of power level and application. So Lower Cant Smith, another safe craft as far as commons and Houses of Morrowind goes. Number 1 probably is not going to come as a surprise to anyone. There's really no question about this. The number 1 most powerful, safest craft card at the moment is Nicksos. Nicksos is a 5/5 for 7 magicka. When you summon it, it gains you 6 magicka this turn. Even if we just completely ignore all of the degenerate things you can do with Nicksos, it's a very strong tempo play on its own. It synergizes with House Dagoth because it's got 5 toughness, or I'm sorry, 5 tech. It synergizes with plot because you have 6 magicka after you play it. It's an absolute beating in a mid-range arena, style deck because of the tempo advantage you can gain by following it up with another big creature. It's great with Alter. Pulling it out gets you, some sort of free magicka. Sort of free, sort of fair magicka, I guess is the best way to put it. Look, I don't think there's any doubt in anyone's mind that something's going to change with the Nicksos combo deck. Like I've said before, I'm leaning towards change to Ulfric's Uprising. But as it stands, it's a common card, so if you craft some Nicksos, don't feel like you're going to be losing out on much if it gets changed itself. And plus, historically, Bethesda and Direwolf have always given us full Soul Trap value for cards that get balance changes. So Nicksos, it is for the number 1 slot on the top 6 commons of Houses of Morrowind. Alright, so now it's time for my top 6 rares from Houses of Morrowind a couple weeks into the expansion. Coming in at number 6 is a card that I am not terribly surprised was good. I thought was going to be good, and that is Ash Berserker. A lot of fire there, so a lot of great effects. Ash Berserker is a 4/3 for 4 that says at the end of your turn, if you have a creature with 5 or more power, draw a card. This is a lot easier to trigger than you might be concerned. Just off the top of my head, decks that you can use this to your advantage in. Warrior, because you have a couple 5-power creatures that are ubiquitous in Warrior. Any rally deck, any deck that can rally this creature once, it'll draw itself a card because it'll trigger itself. House Dagoth, obviously, lots of 5-power creatures in that deck. Control Crusader has some 5-power guards that'll trigger this. It's just a really flexible card that I think is a pretty safe craft. anything that draws you cards is strong. Drawing cards is one of the most powerful things you can do in the game. Ash Berserker does it really well, and it comes on a body that's totally respectable for its cost. So if you have to play this on tempo to make a trade for some reason, or you just need to push damage, you can totally do that and feel good about yourself in the process. Ash Berserker comes in at number 6 on my list. Next, at number 5, is a card that has not been as popular as I thought it would be, but there are a lot of reasons for that, I think. That card is Albedo the Assassin. Now, I know some people aren't huge on this card. It is super easy to remove, but so are most 2-drops in the game. Albedo the Assassin has a 1/2 for 2 with lethal and rally. I think has spots in a lot of strategies, both aggro, mid-range, and control. I think can make use of this card because of the lethal ability and get some incidental bonuses because of the rally. It's going to trade with almost everything in the game, early game, and it's still going to trade with a lot of stuff in the late game if it's not removed. And if your opponent's using a removal spell that costs more than 2 magicka on this, you're coming out ahead. I think that Albedo the Assassin is a card that's going to see more play as lists get more refined. And it's also a card that I think really helps encourage other archetypes, like more aggressive scout strategies, or well, really more aggressive scout strategies is what came immediately to mind. But it has a place in Warrior, in Sorcerer, in Spell Sword aggressive decks. It's in a lot of the Skeleton Spell Sword decks, for instance. It is in some Vani lists. It is in... to be honest, I've never seen it in a Tribunal Temple list, but a Tribunal Temple deck that is control, but focused on, well, let's say mid-range or control, that's focused on exalt creatures instead of on removal and mass removal in order to gain its advantages, I think could also find a use for Albedo the Assassin. I think it's a pretty safe craft because it's a pretty straightforward card that you can jam in a lot of decks, and even if it doesn't directly have any synergy with it, it's strong enough that you can look at it and feel okay about it. So Albedo the Assassin is my number 5 pick. My number 4 pick is it's a very specific card. It is only playable in one of the 3-color houses, and that card is Vani Catspaw. This gets the nod despite being, obviously very constricted in terms of playability for me, because at a 3 magicka 2/2 with last gasp draw a card, I think that's playable. I don't think it's great. I think it's playable. The ability to draw 2 cards and the sacrificed, great. What I like about this is that it is an absolute powerhouse in the right deck. Sacrificing this to alter, sacrificing this to betray. If those things are good, this card probably has something to do with it because of the massive card advantage that this generates. In a world where, let's say, Tribunal Temple Control was king, a Telvanni, ultra value deck could be a meta choice. And Vani Catspaw and cards like it are part of the reason why that strategy would pay off. It's also just not a card that, yes, 2/2 for 3 is not great if you're trying to trade and control the early board. But it does do things like set up for your Leaf Lurkers, your Finish Offs, your Ice Storms, your Firestorms, all those sorts of effects. So having it on the, in the colors that it's in, it's not as awful as its stats would suggest at first. I think this card is just perfectly designed. At 2/3, I think it would just be incredibly good. At 3/2, it would be unbelievably good. And at 3/3, it would be one of the best creatures in the game, in my opinion, just because of the flexibility, the card advantage that it offers in the right shell. I don't think the Vani Catspaw is a card you should just go out and craft, unless you're very, if your budget is constrained. But if you're interested in playing Vani Catspaw is definitely a card you should look at. That was the most justification I'm going to have to do for any of these. They're pretty straightforward, but... my next one is a card that has been super impressive in Arena and I think has constructed applications as well, and that is Awakened Dreamer. Awakened Dreamer is a 2/3 for 2 that says at the end of your turn, if you have a creature with 5 more power, it gets +1/+1. This synergizes with all sorts of stuff. We just discussed with the Ash Berserker how straightforward it and pretty easy it is to trigger these sorts of abilities. Once it gets past 5 power on its own, it triggers itself, and it just keeps growing at the end of every one of your turns. And because it triggers at the end of your turn, in a lot of situations, this is going to be a 3/4 for 2, which at the point at which you have a 5 power creature to trigger it, isn't game breaking, but is very, very solid. And its cheap cost lets you do things like trigger plots from your other cards in the early game. And I just think this card is supremely underrated right now. I honestly have not seen much of it at all outside of Arena, where it's an absolute beast. But I think that in the right deck, this card is just real solid. And the 3 toughness here really, I think, makes a difference. It keeps it out of the range of You know, at 3/2, I think this would be worse, right? Like, this lets it survive potentially long enough to trigger at least once, and if it triggers once, it might trigger again, and so on and so forth. And it has to be answered. I mean, this is not pilfer, but in some ways it's stronger because you don't have to break runes to get value out of this. And if you need to just drop it out of your hand at some point, that's okay too, and it trades well in the early game. So I think Awakened Dreamer is really overlooked right now. Coming in at number 2 is a card that, first of all, has absolutely amazing art. That is Feasting Hunger. I can't tell that this is premium, but it allegedly is. Feasting Hunger is a 3/3 for 3 with guard and summon, gain 1 health for each enemy creature. This card does not belong in every deck that can run it, but for what it does better than I think any other card in the game. There's a cycle to how metas have gone after big content releases in Legends. People play really greedy, kind of interesting, experimental type things in the first couple of weeks, for the most part, although there are some people who play really aggressive decks to prey on them, and that's a totally reasonable strategy too. And then you start settling into these aggressive decks, the ones that a few people were playing before. They become more meta. And the next evolution of that is these token decks, which have a really strong game against some things that the aggressive decks, the otherwise aggressive decks, kind of struggle against. We saw this happen when Skyrim was released. This exact same pattern happened. We saw a brief moment of this pattern happen after Clockwork City, although it was sort of artificially created because the meta didn't really change after Clockwork City. And I'm fairly certain the same thing is going to happen now in the coming weeks. People are going to remember, oh yeah, tokens decks are real good. We just weren't playing them because we were playing our 3-color nonsense things or Nicksos combo or whatever. And Feasting Hunger is great against those decks because the type of deck that's going to be able to exploit Feasting Hunger is the kind of deck that needs to set up for a few turns before it can remove all the crap your opponents put on the board. Feasting Hunger does a great job of road blocking a lane and gaining enough life that you have a buffer long enough to get back into the game. It's not a terrible top deck in the late game. It's just a real solid card for what it does, and I think it's about to get a lot better, and I think it's already pretty good. The types of decks it's good in just aren't being played right now because there's no need, and they have bad matchups against Nicksos. Coming in at number 1 then for my top 6 rares is a card that I don't think I was being hyperbolic when I called the purple Daggerfall Mage, and that is Indoril Mastermind. Indoril Mastermind is a 3 magic 2/1, so not great rate on the stats as far as cost goes, but it says summon, look at the top 2 cards of your deck, draw 1, discard the other. There are obviously some real niche applications here with stuff like oops, sorry about that, guys. Some real niche applications with stuff like Reanimator, that you could make a little bit better potentially with Indoril Mastermind. But what Indoril Mastermind does really well is just cycle through your deck. It's good in House Telvanni when you're looking for very specific tools, and your deck is kind of a toolbox of answers, but you haven't found your altar or your Sun and Shadows. It's, I think, pretty good, or at least reasonably playable in the right Tribunal Temple list. It's good in any kind of combo list that can play purple. The Nicksos variant that's Telvanni, for instance, plays Indoril Masterminds. And it's just a really flexible, solid control, slow mid-range kind of card. I think that it's a card that just like you always look to Merchant's Camel when you're building a combo deck. I think that if you have access to Indoril Mastermind, from now on you will always look at Indoril Mastermind. It doesn't go in every deck, but that's a good thing. This sort of card quality cycling in being available to every deck is not the kind of game we want to play. We need a little bit of inconsistency to balance out decks that whose curves allow them to always be able to play their hand. We don't want them to have the right tool all the time. But Indoril Mastermind is just a great card in a lot of decks, and I think a pretty safe craft if you're into those sorts of things. If Spellsword Control ever comes back, Spellsword Ramp, Indoril Mastermind should be a part of that. And like I said, obviously in things like Slay Scout, Reanimator, in Sorcerer Control, in combos, Indoril Mastermind's your guy. I hope that this gave you some insight into where my head's at as far as the power level of the commons and rares in Houses of Morrowind. And I'll be back tomorrow with a look at my top 6 epics and legendaries. And I'll be totally honest with you, a lot of the power of this set is located in the epics and legendaries. But that's not to say that there aren't cards I didn't name that are commons and rares that are playable, because there certainly are. I mean, I saw a bunch just like going through here. You know, Almalexi's Disciple is a playable card. Morrowind the Assassin's not a terrible card. Surin Pawnbroker is a good card. Blood Sacrament is kind of awful, but Ghostgate Defender is a good card without a deck. Temple Conjurer is even a pretty reasonable card. Hatchery Meddler, reasonable card. Ashpiercer kind of sucks. Alderuin Armsmaster is probably my 7th card if I was putting it on a list. Commando Tongue Heavy's not bad. Look, there's just a lot of good cards. But these are definitely my top 6, and I will see you all tomorrow for the conclusion.